Support for this podcast comes from Frito-Lay and the 2023 Snack Bracket Championship. The Frito-Lay Snack-It Challenge is underway, and fans are voting on their favorite snacks to crown champion. We're talking about prime-time matchups between the best 64 snacks in the land. Will Ruffles Ridges reign supreme? Can Doritos defend their dynasty? Or will Smart Food use their smarts for a surprise upset? Only you can decide. Get in on all the action for a chance to win up to $1,000 or a year's worth of snacks. Let your snacks be heard. Just go to fritolaysnacket.sbnation.com to vote and enter for a chance to win. No purchase necessary. Sweepstakes ends April 3rd, 2023. Void where prohibited. Year's worth of snacks awarded in the form of 52 coupons, each good for one bag of chips. See official rules at fritolaysnacket.sbnation.com.
What's happening, Night fans? Jeff, Sharon, Eric Lopez with you. This is the Black and Gold Banneret Podcast. We're recording this on a little early, actually, Tuesday, October 25th, because we got a very busy week ahead of us. But lots to talk about from a very busy weekend in UCF sports and another busy weekend coming up. Don't forget, you can follow us on Twitter at UCF_Banneret. And also look us up at blackandgoldbanneret.com, as well as on Facebook, Black and Gold Banneret. Eric, what's going on, man?
Not much. I'm glad that we're very civil and we have no conflicts.
Yeah. Well, that's because, on air it's like that, but we argue all the time off the air. Can I actually say that? Yeah, I always wondered this. Can I actually say on the air on a podcast, because you're not really on the air? Like, you're on the air, right? No one's ever clarified this for me. Anyway, so sorry, went off on a wild tangent. All right, so let's talk about what we're going to talk about today. We're going to start off by looking back, like you hinted, at the civil conflict that apparently is no more. We just left the hardware there, which was funny. UCF against UConn. What I thought was a big road win, another big road conference win. We're going to preview. We've been looking forward to this one for a while. UCF and Houston coming up this week. And we're also going to look at, Bob Diaco's complaining, and we're going to take a look at women's soccer with a huge win in overtime this past weekend against East Carolina. A desperately needed win on Senior Day. We're going to look at volleyball, who split the weekend, their home weekend, and have another home weekend coming up. And men's soccer, too, of course. So let's go ahead and get started here with football against UConn. UCF gets the win 24-16, a game where they trailed 13-0 in the middle of the second quarter, but came back and actually trailed by as much as 16-7 with 85 seconds to go before the half. The turning point, with 1 second to go before halftime. I thought this actually was ill-advised, and it's a good thing it turned out the way it did. 19-yard touchdown pass from Mackenzie Milton to Jordan Akins with 1 second left on the clock, capped off a 9-play, 75-yard drive just before the half to put UCF within striking distance at 16-14. And then Milton with two more touchdown passes one more touchdown pass for 3 on the day. In the third quarter, he hit Adrian Killens over the middle for a 39-yarder to put UCF up 21-16, and that was pretty much it. UCF tacked on a fourth-quarter field goal from Matthew Wright. And Mackenzie Milton, 3 touchdown passes. Rainy day in UConn. It looked like things were might have been getting close to out of hand in the second quarter, and then all of a sudden things just kind of turned around. Milton led long drives, 93 yards. 75 yards, 75 yards. Those were the touchdown drives that we had in this ball game. And UCF comes up with another big road conference win that was a response after a heartbreaking loss. Remember the ECU game on the road, the conference opener, was after the overtime loss to Maryland. This game at UConn in bad weather comes right after the heartbreaking loss to Temple. So are we starting to see a pattern here, Eric Lopez? This team has a rather short memory, and that can be a good thing, it looks like.
Well, a lot of times when you're young, you have a short memory, and that's what this team is. It's very young
I'm
still.
getting old, and my memory's getting shorter.
Well, that's true, too. No, it was a good response, and I thought it was a very important second half. I thought the defense was lights out in the second half. They made the big stops when Connecticut was driving late in the game. And I thought offensively they were mature. And you're right, the end of the first half, that was huge. That touchdown changed the momentum. I felt it changed the shift of the game, and it was great to see Killings involved. And, I felt this was not going to be a pretty game. You knew the weather was going to be a factor and the conditions were going to be a factor. And I think the encouraging thing that I take away from this game, if nothing else, is this team showed that it can win an ugly game. And it doesn't have to win pretty. And I think that's a great sign of this team's character. And Scott Frost has talked about it, and he talked about it again after the game about this team's character and their work ethic and their enthusiasm for the game and earning this victory.
We played a whale of a football team. I think UConn is a really talented team. Our players have been through a lot in the last week after the way the last game ended, and I can't say enough about their character to rebound and fight another close game and find a way to win it.
That's the thing, Jeff. This team just doesn't really. They play hard no matter what, and they earned it. And a lot of teams would have kind of mailed it in or still have a hangover after the heartbreaking loss to Temple. But and they dug themselves a hole early, but I never got a sense, Jeff, that they were in panic mode at all. I thought they were calm. And I think Scott brings that, don't you? I think Scott Frost brings some calm into this team as well. And I thought it was very encouraging. Very encouraging. Great effort by the defense again. And I thought the offense did some nice things. And I think I'm pleased with you got to be pleased with the win. You beat UConn for the first time, believe it or not, since 2013. And you get a road win in not the most of nice of conditions from a weather standpoint. So I think you have to be pleased.
You know what's the word that I thought of after the game? Confidence. Mm-hmm. This team fell down. They were confident. They didn't lose their confidence.
Right.
They thought, hey, you know what? Yeah, we might be down, but we can play with this team. And then they clawed back into the game. And the other thing with confidence, too, is look at how UCF won this game with Milton's numbers. He was stellar in this game. 29 of 45 for 317 yards, 3 touchdowns, no picks. He was sacked once. When he got into trouble, he threw the ball away, which is exactly what you needed to do in those kinds of conditions. And again, UCF had the confidence, and the offensive staff had the confidence in him to put this bad weather game in his hands, because the running game, this is actually not UCF's best performance in the running game. Only 83 net yards rushing on 30 total attempts. Dontravius Wilson was the leading rusher with 57 yards on 11 carries. But that's just 2.8 yards a carry as a team total. And I thought that was what really stood out for me in this game, was how confident they were in Mackenzie Milton on the road in bad weather, getting the job done. And then you mentioned the defense. And this cannot be overstated how fantastic they were in this ball game as a total. Now, I know UConn ended up with 413 total yards, but to do that and then still hold them under 20 points, in fact, under 17 points, was, to me, a really impressive performance. Even though UConn ran 80 plays and averaged 5.2 a play, the defense did what they said, bend but don't break, right? And they bent a lot, but they did not break. And credit to Eric Shenander and the defensive staff that came up with the plays when they needed to. I'm trying to pull up the third down. Here they are. UCF and UConn were both in this game 5 of 17 on third downs. And but the Knights got the job done on defense, man. And that's a real credit to what this defense was able to do.
No question about it. And again, that's the encouraging thing. And as we'll get into when we talk about the Houston game, is this defense is playing with a lot of confidence, and I think that's good going into a Houston game. And they're making plays, and they're aggressive, and it's a positive win for the program. And and yet I like the attitude. It's, hey, it's no big deal. We just move on to the next game, and big window. Get to we talked about in the previous podcast about if this team wants to get to a bowl game, they needed to win this UConn game, and I think that was critical. And they did that, and now all of a sudden you get a chance to play a Houston team that's got a little adversity. So you never know what happens. And for whatever it's worth, you're still in the conference race. And while you might need some help perhaps down the road, you never know. So I think this team is growing and it's learning on the fly.
Now, that wasn't the entire story from this game, because I think what actually came about, or at least the fun part, was afterwards. So Bob Diaco, the head coach of UConn, who invented this civil conflict rivalry out of thin air, seemingly, after the game, UCF just left the field without the trophy. All right, so here's angry Ken Bone with his red sweater, also known as UConn head coach Bob Diaco, on Tuesday morning after the UCF game.
Central Florida was the cream of the crop. Easy for me to say, hey, would you be interested in a trophy game to add some intrigue, to add some interest, to add some true, fair, wonderful, intercollegiate, awesome energy? Yes. In fact, I'd be interested. Has this gotten more copy and conversation than the championship game a year ago? So Houston played Navy in the championship game. Was it covered nationally as widely as our rivalry and our trophy game? So I don't really understand why it was a bad idea. I really don't. And I'm sorry to everyone that I had an idea. So what's your idea? How do we make these games relevant to our fans and followers? How do we add and make sure America understands that the American Conference is every bit as good as all these other leagues? What's your idea? So, yeah, clearly, they didn't go get it. Very disappointing to me. It seemed like a fun thing for kids and young people and young men and it just seemed like a fun intercollegiate piece.
Can you believe the chutzpah of this guy? I mean, this is unbelievable. I think I think this is actually now a rivalry. Like in terms of UCF, like saying, "Hey, this is no rivalry. This is now a rivalry." Jemias Pittman of the Knights on Twitter, a couple minutes after the game was over, said on Twitter, "We didn't want that poop emoji, conflict in quotation marks, trophy emoji, and then hashtag ain't no conflict." I mean, see, like now, because one of us is saying, stop it, this is not a thing, now it's a thing. Because Diaco just threw UCF's administration under the bus.
Well, we don't even know who he's talking about.
I know. We don't know if he's saying this about O'Leary or someone in the UCF offices. But either way,
we don't even know if the person he talked to is still even at UCF, for all we know.
And he wouldn't even clarify that when he was asked about it. So he's trying so hard to make this a thing. I almost admire it.
I think it's a rivalry in UConn's mind. I don't know if UCF will ever accept this as a rivalry because, and I mean, I'm amazed at how much attention this has gotten. It's gotten national attention. Scott Van Pelt on his Sports Center show that he does most of the weeknights at midnight addressed this on his One Big Thing segment that he does, which is fantastic. I'm a big fan of it. And he talked about rivalries, and then he brought up the UCF Connecticut here. Let's listen to hear what he said about it.
I get what Diaco was going for. These things take some time. Heck, maybe Paul Bunyan's act seemed silly initially, but they didn't have social media around to mock the idea. I don't know. Heck, maybe the governors of Connecticut and Florida could get involved, bet something, jazz it up a little bit. Probably not. As Rob Bass explained to us, it takes two to make a thing go right. It also takes two to have a civil conflict.
This is amazing because now this is a national story. Now this is going to be a thing heading into the game next year because we're going to revisit this. I mean, now it's for real.
Yeah, but I kind of agree with Scott Van Pelt in that it takes two to make a rivalry, right? It takes two to make a civil conflict. And UCF, I don't think, has ever wanted to participate in this. And I think UConn is trying to force this on them. So it's very fascinating. I can't think of another example like this. Can you? Where a team is trying to force something there as a rivalry or something like that. And it's just, I can't think of it. It would be almost the equivalent. I mean, the equivalent of this would be something like, kind of would be if I don't know. I can't even think of a similar comparison.
I think
it would be like, you know what it is? It would be like if the Arizona Cardinals just decided to make a trophy when they faced the New York Giants or something like that. The Giants like, what are you talking about?
Well, I think that the closest thing I can come to in terms of seeing this was that, believe it or not, like there was a time about a decade ago when USF still looked at us like we were basically a community college, even though, you know, UCF's at that time they were in Conference USA, and we were, you know, at least for football, and at least for football we were in the MAC, and we were in the ASUN and everything else, and they were in Conference USA, and we were trying to say, hey, let's get this thing going, let's get a little rivalry going on the football field, and they just kind of kept us at arm's length until finally both schools this year agreed, okay, let's make this a thing now between us. It's official now. It makes sense for the both of us. Diaco is trying to make this thing happen between two schools that have absolutely nothing to do with each other than they're in the same conference.
Right. There's not a lot in common. Like the UCF USF, I mean, there was a lot of things that made a lot of sense for that to be a rivalry. So a lot of people are saying, that should be a rivalry. There's nobody saying that for UCF UConn. Nobody. There's none at all.
Other than the first two letters are the same. None of that makes any sense. So, but now I think he's successfully I think he's accomplished his goal. He's now created a little bit of bad blood because now they're out for it. They're like, hey, look at how they disrespected us. They left the trophy out on the field. They walked into our house on their end, right? But now they come into our stadium next year, and they're going to come out guns a-blazing. At least that, you know, assuming Bob Diaco is still around, which he may very well be. But again, I'm going to be interested to see what Scott Frost does about this now. You know, what does he think about it? Because we wouldn't have left the trophy there if he had said, "Hey, go get that trophy." You know what I mean? But like Scott Van Pelt's, you know, alluded to in his piece, and I'll put a link to the video because the video is great too in the show notes. Like Scott Van Pelt mentioned, you know, when Minnesota defeats, I think it's Wisconsin for Paul Bunyan's axe, or whoever it is that they're playing for, you know, they run to that trophy and go grab that thing and, you know, parade it around the stadium like they just won the Vince Lombardi trophy. That, you know, we just left the trophy there sitting on the end of the bench, and you see like the wide shot in the video of some, you know, UConn sports, you know, equipment intern, like, you know, sheepishly going over to the end of our bench and picking up the trophy and putting it in the back of a golf cart and driving off. I mean, it's unbelievable. I mean, I thought that was a boss move, to be honest with you, to just leave that thing there and be like, you know what, we don't want this. Thanks, nice try. See you next year, you know.
Yeah, I think that's going to be the attitude moving forward. To be honest, I don't see this changing.
This is great. I'll tell you this: school that we do have, I think, actually more of a rivalry with. Team we're playing this week, Houston Cougars. And Houston right now, and just to segue off of this, Houston and UCF, you know, we played so many great games with them before. Houston was the first team first ever top 25 ranked team that UCF ever beat in school history. The Cougars right now at 6-2, 3-2 in the league. You know, at one point in the top 5, ranked in the top 5 nationally, or were they number 6? I think is where they peaked out. Is that right, Eric? Yeah, number 6 is where they peaked, but they've lost 2 of their last 3, and they've both been on the road in conference. At Navy, the 46-40 loss in Annapolis, and then last week, boy, they just laid an egg against SMU in Dallas, 38-16. They were a disaster in that game, and now lo and behold, here we come into Houston to play the Cougars. We've seen these two teams get together so many times before. I mean, the last time we were in Houston, Greg Ward Jr. was about 6 inches from the game-tying touchdown when the ball was knocked out of his hands by Brandon Alexander. Boy, then there was the game in 2013 that went down to the final possession and the defensive stand at the goal line.
Sure.
Obviously we beat Houston way back in the Citrus Bowl. These two teams have played some serious games that are rivalry-worthy, don't you think?
Yes. It's funny. I'm a big proponent of that. It's funny you mentioned that because a lot of people at UCF Houston, I think, have had a great rivalry in multiple sports. Obviously, I from the softball end, was a big rivalry in Conference USA, and it still is in the American Conference. But you look at football, and you brought it up. I think back to, for example, 2005 at the Citrus Bowl. UCF got bowl eligible for the first time that season. They knocked off Houston in a dramatic game. Kevin Cobb was the quarterback. He got sacked. Paul Carrington. It was loud in the Citrus Bowl.
The Houston win did make us bowl eligible. And you're right, Kevin Cobb, who parlayed into an NFL career. We ended up bottling him up in that game. You're right. That was another thrilling game that season.
It was an exciting game, one of the better games I've ever been to. And it was a great game. UCF got to a bowl eligible. Obviously, we know the rest of the history in that. So that was a great football game. And then
that was Artie Briles, who was the head coach there, right? Mm-hmm.
Correct. Art Briles was the head coach. Fast forward a little bit. 2009, UCF and Bright House with Brent Harvey running all over a Houston team that was a top 10 team with Kevin Sumlin at the head coach and Case Keenum. And UCF won that game, an exciting game, 37-32.
I was at that game as well. I was working for UCF at the time, and Houston was starting to look like they had the look of getting some national recognition. I think when Case Keenum was having that season of his, and then they come into UCF, and this was when Brett Hodges came in as the quarterback after Rob Calabrese was benched, and that was part of that streak that got UCF to the St. Petersburg Bowl that year.
It is. That's correct. That was a great football game. Think back to 2013, the magical UCF Houston. That was a showdown in the conference game. There was a night game on ESPN, too. I remember I was at the game. It was packed, and it came down to a goal line stand by the UCF defensively. It was a game where, Storm Johnson fumbled the ball. UCF had some turnover issues. Houston was led by John O'Corn, was the quarterback.
Who's now at Michigan.
Right, he played his high school ball at St. Thomas Aquinas. Houston drove down late to the game, to the goal line or the 10-yard line. I'll never forget. He was going for the end zone on I think it was a post pattern, and Brandon Alexander got his fingertips on it, deflected the pass on a 3rd and goal. Cranberry, I believe, was the receiver, and he was open, and he would have caught it for the game-winning touchdown, and that would have changed the complexion of the conference. If Houston would have won that game, possibly Houston would have won the conference, not UCF. But UCF won that game. It was a dramatic game, drew big television numbers in the Orlando market. And then the following year, those game you're referring to in Houston, it was a Thursday night game. Houston's driving with Greg Ward at the time. Now, this is when Greg Ward was kind of coming out of party.
It was that game when he actually took over the quarterback position because I remember they started somebody else. I forget
John O'Corn.
You're right, John O'Corn, and they benched him for Greg Ward, and then they came back in that game and nearly won it.
And what's funny is Greg Ward was a wide receiver.
Right.
And it was kind of funky in the game. And you're right, Holman, UCF couldn't put him away, and Houston was driving, and you just remember Ward running towards the goal line there by the sideline, and he dives, and Brandon Alexander's there and knocks the ball away. And nobody's like, what's going on? Is it a touchback? And it was called the touchback. It was a dramatic win for UCF. And even last year, it turns out to be a game that will be remembered, unfortunately, for the wrong reasons. It was a game that UCF, remember, jumped out to a 10-0 lead on Houston. Now, at this point, Houston was starting to kind of steamroll and become Houston. They had the magical year going to winning the conference and going to the Peach Bowl. UCF actually jumped on them 10-0, and then Houston just kind of onslaught them. They scored right before the half, and they dominated the second half. I think they scored like 56 unanswered or something like that.
59-10 was the final.
59 unanswered or something like that. It was either 56 point. It was I tried to block it out, but what's noteworthy about that turns out was George O'Leary's last football game as head coach of UCF. And that was it. The next day he resigned. So that has a bit of an input on that. And now here we are in the 2016 edition. And you're right. I think these two are very similar. They're in very attractive markets. who are capable of being top 25 programs at every sport. They are both in a rich state for high school talent in football.
They're big metropolitan public universities.
Absolutely. And both have to go up against stiff competition in the state. UCF's got to go up against Florida and Florida State and Miami. Houston's got to go up against Texas and Texas A&M. And now if you want to throw Baylor in there and TCU, obviously. So there's a lot of competition from both sides, but both teams have won major bowl games for the American Conference. UCF in the 2014 Fiesta Bowl, first year as an American Conference member, beat Baylor in the Fiesta Bowl, a school from the state of Texas. Fast forward to last season, Houston in the All Access Bowl goes to the Peach Bowl and beats Florida State, a school from the state of Florida, for their marquee win. So there's a lot of similarities in both. I think both programs and both fan bases they both definitely believe they should have been in the Big 12, and both believe they're a Power 5 type school. So I've always enjoyed it. Obviously, I've gone to Houston many a times with softball, so I've kind of seen it from the softball rivalry standpoint, but I've gone to the campus. I like the campus. I like everything about it. So, yeah, to be honest with you, if I ranked it from a conference rivalry, I think South Florida is obviously number one in football. And then after that, I guess UCF fans would probably say East Carolina. But after that, I would say that Houston should be third. I would say Houston because of the games I've just mentioned and the similarities. And I think both programs are fighting similar battles, don't you?
I agree. Now, I find this interesting. UCF and Houston have played 7 times. First meeting was back in 2005. It was that game at the Citrus Bowl. 31-29 was the final in that game. The Knights have won 5 of the 7 matchups. Last year's game snapped a 4-game winning streak for UCF against Houston. But here's the thing that's interesting. UCF has never beaten Houston by more than a touchdown. Margin of victory was going back through time 2, 5, 7, 5, and 5 have been the margins of victory for UCF. The 2 times Houston's beat UCF, the first one was by 20 points in 2006. The second one was by 49 last year. So I thought that these 2 teams actually played more often, but they don't. They've only played 7 times. This will be the 8th meeting. And I'm really interested to see how this matchup is going to shake out, with Houston kind of coming back to earth after they knocked off Oklahoma in their opener, and they got all the national headlines, and then things have started to come apart in conference play. Coming off of the loss, UCF coming off of a big road victory against UConn, going on the road again. Tom Herman has kind of seen the bloom come off the rose a little bit. I think even you were saying that he was all but a shoo-in for a big-time job, probably most likely Texas.
Yeah, I would bet Texas, yes.
I don't know if that's still going to be the case now, but nonetheless, here, let's listen to Tom Herman previewing UCF from this week's press conference.
Oh, he's got those guys playing great in that system. They're very similar to Oregon. They're going to run to set up the play-action pass, and they're going to want to run it and have a lot of misdirection with motions and all that. So he's done a really, really good job in a short amount of time.
Well, fair enough, but I still think Coach Herman's a very good head coach. I do think he's going to get a big-time job. But do you think that maybe his chance at the Texas job has evaporated a little bit?
No, I don't, and I'll tell you why. First of all, he was a grad assistant at Texas under Mac Brown. I think people are going to have glimpses. I mean, what he's done at Houston is still remarkable, and I think what's happened with Houston this season, and I didn't pick Houston to win the conference this year before the year, and the reason was, last year, Houston kind of was under the radar. Houston kind of snuck up on some people, and they had a chip on their shoulder. They had something to prove, and everything broke right, and you had that magical year. UCF can relate to that. 2013, a lot of things broke right. It was very magical. So what happened this year, now you come in, opening game of the season, you beat – and now everybody's talking about Oklahoma, and you beat Oklahoma. And now you're talking about the Big 12, and you're talking about the Big 12.
And the $5 million bonus in your contract if you get into the Big 12.
All that stuff. And meanwhile, so now so you're doing all that stuff. Meanwhile, everybody, now you're the target in the American Conference. everybody circles you for their game. And Tom Herman mentioned this as well in this week is, they've had 3 losses in the 2 seasons. They lost at UConn last year. They lost at Navy this year. And of course at SMU last week. All 3 games, those schools stormed the field after the win. The students stormed the field. And what it tells you is they're the target now. And I don't think you could tell the players, to me, they are now know what it's like to have a bullseye on them. And I think some of the players have been caught off guard with that. And I think that's what happened. I saw the SMU game and I watched the Navy game. The Navy game was unique because, and this Navy plays that unique triple option style. It was rainy and slick.
Yeah, it was like they were playing another sport out there in that game.
Yeah. And then the SMU, you could tell that was like their bowl game, and that's a big rivalry for them. I think and there's been maybe some internal issues, discipline issues. You do wonder if all the Tom Herman rumors, maybe hurt this team. You wonder, let's be honest, once they beat Oklahoma, I know, and friends of mine in Houston, they were talking playoff. They weren't talking American Conference title. They were talking playoff, and you wonder when they lost to Navy if the balloon kind of popped there, and it's all of a sudden like, that being said, this is interesting this Saturday. And I think what Tom Herman is selling is that nobody's beaten them at home, which is true, since he's gotten there. And I think they will be ready to play this Saturday. I actually would have preferred that they would have beaten SMU, and then UCF could have snuck in there. I actually don't think that works to their advantage. Look, he still can coach, and Greg Ward is still very talented. Greg Ward's had some turnover issues this year. I think that's where also Houston's gotten themselves in trouble. And we talk about this game for UCF, for them to pull this upset, and it is still an upset. They're a 2-touchdown underdog, 12 to 14 points, depending on where you're looking.
I see. By the way, I see 10 points on ESPN.com, but either way, it's still a.
Okay, so what that tells me is people are putting money on UCF. Then,
in fact, I just refreshed the page and it jumped down to 9. The money is pouring in on UCF right now.
Well, a lot of people must be banking on the fact, 2 things, that maybe they feel that Houston is just going to tank it the rest of the year, or they're just going to be flat, or are still licking their wounds. And the other thing might be the fact that, hey, Houston's defense, which was playing very well early in the year, has had some injuries, and they've struggled lately. They got, SMU moved the ball at them at will. So I think there's a combination of those things. But can UCF's defense continue to contain Greg Ward, keep him in the pocket, and force some turnovers? And then on the other side of the ball, can UCF run on Houston? Because Houston's been a very good run defense. They shut, but can UCF kind of exploit that a little bit like Navy did to a certain degree? I think will be very fascinating. I think the interesting thing about this matchup, in years past, they were the contrast of styles. Houston would run their typical spread offenses, whether it be Art Briles or Kevin Sumlin, or last year with Tom Herman, whereas UCF with George O'Leary will run the pro set. And you know this from being inside of it. UCF strategy was always to run the football and play clock.
And control keep them off the field. Right.
That was always the strategy. Well, now Scott Frost is really not that big of a deal about time of possession. In fact, they're probably now more similar than they have been. And Tom Herman acknowledged that, talking about how they compared a lot to Oregon and what they do over there at Oregon. Tom Herman kind of uses what the Urban Meyer offense uses spread, but also sprinkled in a little Oregon himself. But so now they're more similar. So this could be a track meet. It could be a track meet on both sides. I expect a lot of points on both sides because Houston's got some injuries on the defensive side, and it could come down to UCF holding Houston to field goals. We saw how Houston's kicking game was an issue in the SMU game as well, and play good red zone defense and forcing some turnovers. And then on the offensive side, same thing. Don't turn the ball over. Houston had a battle with Tulsa. They won the game basically because Tulsa fumbled the ball that was returned for a game-winning touchdown with about a minute and change to go.
Yeah.
So I think this will be a
they needed that goal line stand against Tulsa to win that game with the pass right there at the very end.
Correct, 38-31 final. So I think that's probably why a lot of people are picking UCF, because I think they're confident that UCF can score on Houston. And I think UCF will represent themselves very well. I could see this game being a 45-31 type of game, don't you?
Yeah, I do. And you look at the averages, that's pretty much what they're looking for. Houston's averaging 39.4 a game on offense. UCF averaging 32. Both teams are giving up in the range of 21 to 24 a game. Both teams are averaging about over 400 yards of total offense. Houston's averaging 480, UCF 403. Houston with a little bit of an advantage in terms of the defense. Their rush defense has been very good this year. They're giving up under 100 yards a game on the ground. But, I do suspect this will be a very close game and possibly quite high scoring, too. I do think, though, that Houston does have the favor being that they are at home. They're coming off the loss, so I think they're a little ticked off. But, again, I don't know how this team's going to react after that. You may be right. Maybe this is a psychological – as much as last week was a psychological test for UCF, this week is a psychological test for Houston at home coming off of a loss. So, I don't know. I can't quite get a good feel for this game. I still like Houston at home, but I just think it's going to be closer than maybe even Vegas thinks it's going to be with a 9 or 10 point number. It's Saturday on ESPNU at 12 noon, another noon game. So, Allie, check the weather here on that one too, because.
By the way, real quick while you do that, I think a key matchup to keep in mind as you watch this game, Houston's got some tall receivers.
Yeah.
Stephen Dunbar comes to mind. He's over 6 feet. They like to throw that fade pattern in the end zone. And it'll be interesting how the UCF defensive backs play against those tall, physical Houston receivers. I think that's something to keep in mind because Houston likes to throw those jump balls. I'm sure they will be coached up on that. So that'll be something to for.
Yeah, it's going to be a warm day on Saturday. High of 87, low of 68. Around game time, it's going to be in the low 80s and a little breezy, 10-mile-an-hour winds at Houston. So
I also, by the way, I also think the noon game helps UCF because I don't think that crowd will be as jacked up as they would have been if, say, it was a night game. I mean, it's not that different than what UCF has had to deal with, right? We've been there when UCF played noon games and opposed to a 6 o'clock game, for example. It's a difference of an atmosphere. So add to the fact that Houston's, I'm sure there's a group of Houston fans that are disappointed with this season. That's already checked out. Now, it is homecoming over there, but like I said, you'll know, I think, in the first 10 to 12 minutes, like who showed up and who didn't show up and what kind of game we're going to get.
I'm looking at, early games. UCF this year is 2-1 on noon starts. Beat at East Carolina, at Houston, both of those, or at UConn, both of those were noon starts on the road. UCF won them both. The only other noon start we lost was the Michigan game. So, maybe that does play into UCF's favor. Anyway, all right. So that's UCF and Houston. Again, ESPNU at noon. And who's calling that game?
Roy Philpott, Tom Ramsey with Don Davenport on the sideline.
All right, I have no idea who those guys are. All right, anyway.
Wow. You're just upset because it's not a Syracuse connection. That's what you were looking for. You're looking for
that's all you that's listen, that's the farm system, man. I don't know who any of those guys are. Anyway, I apologize to them. Sorry about that, fellas, but I'm sure they'll do a fine job on ESPNU at noon.
You gave us like an in-depth breakdown of the guy that called the game on
my guy Tucci, Matt Martucci, because I know Matt. We go back 10 years, so
great. But now I mentioned games, I don't know who they are.
I don't. I'm just being honest. Hey, and we're honest here on the Black and Gold Banneret Podcast. We're not going to lie to you, and blow smoke. All right, so UCF and Houston Saturday at noon, ESPNU. Make sure you check it out. All right, stick around. We get back after a short break. We will discuss a big weekend and a big win for UCF women's soccer on Senior Day and what they have to do to get into the NCAA tournament. Stick around. This is the Black and Gold Banneret Podcast. Back after this.
Hello, Night Nation. This is Andrew Fegley.
This is Trey Strelka with the UCF Nightline Podcast, the original, the #1 rated UCF sports podcast.
You can follow us on Twitter and Facebook. On Twitter, it's UCF_Nightline and at www.ucfnightlinepodcast.com.
Be sure to subscribe to us as well on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and YouTube.
And when you get sick of listening to these guys, make sure you look us up.
Don't forget, that's the UCF Nightline Podcast. Go Knights!
Charge on.
Now, back to the Black and Gold Banneret Podcast.
Welcome back to the Black and Gold Banneret Podcast. Jeff, Sharon, Eric Lopez with you here as we roll through. Well, we finished wrapping up football. We got to talk a little women's soccer now because they had a huge win this weekend, this Sunday, in fact, at home on Senior Day. Went to double OT against East Carolina, tied at 2, and the Knights get the victory on a golden goal in the 101st minute by Morgan Ferrara, and UCF gets a critical victory and a key 3 points in the American by defeating East Carolina. The Knights are currently at 8-7-1, and if you're saying, well, what's the big deal about that? Well, as we've said in the podcast before, the Knights' RPI right now, and I have to pull it up, but their RPI is unusually high for a team that's hovering around 500 because of the difficulty of their schedule. But they get the win over East Carolina, and that's key for them in the standings, isn't it, Eric?
Well, it is. I mean, here's the thing, though. We're going down to the final weekend of the regular season. UCF is currently 7th in the conference standings with 10 points. Cincinnati has 11. South Florida has 11. Tulsa, who UCF plays, by the way, in Tulsa, has 12. SMU with 16, Memphis 18, Connecticut 19. Why that's important? The top 6 teams in this conference make the conference tournament. So, in other words, UCF right now would be on the outside looking in, and they must make the conference tournament, in my opinion, to make the NCAA tournament. They're not going to make the NCAA tournament if they don't make the conference tournament. Now, the thing is, the good news is I talked about 2 points separates 4th place Tulsa from UCF. And, what stung about UCF, and while that East Carolina win was dramatic, was they had bounced back after a tough loss to Cincinnati at home. That's what stung. So now they know what they got to do. The good news for them is they control their destiny here. If they win out, they will be in the conference tournament. But they have, that's the easiest way to explain it. Otherwise, you get into a situation where you're going to be scoreboard watching other matches over the weekend, and then it could come down to points and stuff like that. And it's not going to be easy. UCF will finish this regular season on the road. They're going to be at Tulsa, and they're going to be at Memphis, who's playing for a berth in the conference tournament, also seedings and all that stuff. And there's a long-time rivalry with those two schools when it comes to the soccer. So. It's a tough spot, and you caught the end of that match. I know in person after volleyball ended, and we'll get to that, but that was a must-win, and that was dramatic as it gets, because if they somehow didn't get that win, if they didn't get the result, they would be in a lot of trouble. As it is, they put themselves in this position now with an opportunity. They just have to qualify for the conference tournament, and then it's a new season at that point, and you got to make a deep run. But it's significant. This Thursday night, 8:00 Eastern at Tulsa is a huge game.
Must win. But they're both must wins the rest of the way.
At Memphis on Sunday at 1:00. So it's there. And that's the good news about it, is it's in your hands. If UCF doesn't get the results, it's on them. But you're right. This is a monster game. For their postseason aspirations. I mean, there's just no way of sugarcoating it.
Yeah, so like we mentioned, the game-winning goal by Morgan Ferrara, a junior on Senior Day, getting the game-winning goal. UCF had 2 other goals from Courtney O'Connell. They actually scored the other 2 goals in a span of 28 seconds. Here's the person who scored the first goal to tie it at 1, senior Courtney O'Connell.
Well, first of all, scoring a goal on senior night was just unreal. I mean, the crowd was here, my family, my friends. It was just such a memorable moment. I'll never forget it for the rest of my life. But I think, after this win, we really have to bite down and, finish the rest of the season with, the rest of the wins. So, yeah, it was such a great moment. I was crying after, and I was really excited. But
28 seconds later, Carol Rodriguez put UCF in the lead at 2-1. Here's what Carol's had to say after the game.
Yeah, we knew how important this game was for us. It was a do or die. So now we're going to just work on small details that we need to improve on and just come out to fight the next game and just look for another win.
And I wanted to get these in there because it was really a team effort, this game. Here's Morgan Ferrara, who scored the golden goal that clinched the 3-2 victory.
It was everything. We had to get a win today. There was no other option. Halftime, we just broke it down and said, look, we're not losing this game. We have to win. Going on in the season, hopefully this can start our momentum back up like it was in the beginning of the season and just get us back on track to win these next 2 games and hopefully back in the conference tournament and come out on top.
Well, you could tell the excitement and on the part of the players, and I love listening to Courtney O'Connell talking about how emotional that whole day is, and that's why it's senior day is always tough. I think senior day is the hardest day to ever win a game in any sport because of how emotional it is. On the other hand, here's Tiffany Roberts-Sahadak talking about her emotions after the game and how relieved she was after that victory.
I'm very relieved. I'm very excited. I'm proud of this team. Yes, we are on the bubble, and it's just 1 game at a time. So there's 2 more. We're just going to focus on Tulsa now, and do our best. We've put ourselves in a tough position, but I believe in this team. We have a lot of ability, so it's just about digging deep and getting that final result, and then we'll come down to these details. But I believe in this team, and I know we're up for the challenge.
So they still have, like we said, 2 matches to go for women's soccer at Tulsa, at Memphis. Both of them must wins. By the way, the RPI, I did manage to pull it up. The Knights currently 52nd in the RPI nationally. To put that into perspective, the only 2 American teams ahead of them are SMU at 35 and Memphis, 3 teams ahead of them. SMU at 35, Memphis at 27, and UConn at 15. So if they're going to clinch this berth in the NCAA or in the conference tournament, never mind the NCAA, in the conference tournament to get in, they're going to have to defeat. I think they are going to have to not just knock off Tulsa, who's just ahead of them in the standings, and keep them from getting from and get 3 points against them. I think they're also going to have to score 3 against Memphis too, and Memphis is very good, 12-3-1 overall, and 27th, tied for 27 in the RPI with Penn State. So that's going to be a tough road to hoe for UCF.
Couple things. First of all, that Tulsa match, by the way, will be live free on the American Digital Network. If you go to theamerican.org, you can actually watch the match for free. You and I, Jeff, have worked with the American Digital Network. They do a great job. I would expect with the match being at Tulsa that my friend Bruce Howard, the voice of Tulsa, if he doesn't have to travel, I'm assuming he will call that match. He does a great job. I had the privilege of working with him for the for the softball conference tournament up in Tulsa this past year. So that's an 8:00 on Thursday night. And again, I cannot emphasize the importance of this match. UCF is a point, right now at 10 points. Tulsa's at 12. You get 3 points for a win, 1 for a draw. So do the math there. And then you mentioned Memphis. Memphis, 27 RPI. I mean, that's a great RPI opportunity for UCF to knock off a win there and really improve the resume also. So there's a lot of factions on that. I want to break down the other teams real quick on the schedule because, we like to do that. We like to do the scoreboard watching. USF has to play Memphis on Thursday night. So, if you're UCF, you're actually rooting for Memphis, and that's not hard, to knock off South Florida. And if UCF can get that result, right, because if UCF can get the win over Tulsa, for example, they would leapfrog USF, for there. So that's something to keep in mind. And that's the beauty. Again, we've talked about this in the past with travel partners. USF has to play Tulsa to end the regular season. So those are a couple of things to keep in mind. Cincinnati, I'm trying to see where they're playing this weekend and what their outlook is. But you're right. It's going to come down to the last day, which from a conference standpoint has got to be exciting. It's been a really good year for the league, very balanced, a lot of quality in the league, which I think has helped. Now, Cincinnati will finish with Temple, who's the worst team in the league. So that's a huge advantage for Cincinnati.
Yeah, they got UConn on Thursday, too.
Now, but see, that's the funny thing. It's an interesting one. Cincinnati goes and plays the best team in the league, arguably, in UConn, and then finishes with the worst in Temple. So you're probably thinking that Cincinnati will at least get 3 points there. And in those two combined matches, Cincinnati probably would be thrilled to get 4. So if you do the math there, I think UCF realistically is going to have to win both matches to jump Cincinnati. But again, you said it yourself. The best case scenario would be for Memphis to knock off, okay, and I'm going to do this slowly so people can kind of understand this because I know it could get a little complicated. Right. For Memphis to knock off South Florida on Thursday night, get a clean win. I don't want to draw, although a draw is not the worst thing. UCF beats Tulsa. And then what you would have in that scenario, UCF would be at 13 points. Tulsa would be at 12 still. USF would either be at 11 or 12 points based on the result on Thursday night. And then what happens there in that scenario is UCF, in theory, then would root for Tulsa and USF to one of them just get a draw at that point, right, possibly, or one of them just to lose, period. And UCF, like for example, then if USF were to beat Tulsa on Sunday, then UCF would have more points than Tulsa anyway, so that would leapfrog them into the tournament. Or if Tulsa were to beat USF and USF loses to Memphis and UCF picks up that win with Tulsa, they would have more points as well. So those are some of the combinations to look for as you follow this all weekend long. But it's a big 2 nights, and you mentioned it. The Tulsa match, just circle it. And I know you usually ask me this at the end of the podcast, what are you looking forward to the most? That right there, I'm looking for. Circle that with a big circle. And Thursday, in fact, is a huge night of UCF athletics, as we'll get into with volleyball and why. It's really one of the bigger nights, Jeff, that I can remember volleyball and soccer having on the same night in a long time.
Great segue, because we're going to go to volleyball right now. The Knights at 17-6, 7-3 in the conference, coming off of a split at home, defeated Tulsa on Friday night in 3, and it was a pretty close match, but got the job done. But then faced SMU, who was tops in the conference coming in, and got swept in that match in 3. SMU, by the way, like I said, first place in the conference. They've had a coach there who's been there for 20-plus years. And then also, now Jenny Maurer, the associate head coach, was the acting head coach for that match as Todd Dagenais was under the weather. SMU's pretty good, and we had a front row seat for that one.
For us, we're continuing to grow up. Every day in practice, every match, we expose a little bit more of our offense, and try to clean up those details, the little things, offensively and defensively. And I think that, we have found ourselves in moments, but again, that's the best competition that we've faced in a while. So, that pace of play is something that we know that we can execute. But we didn't today. And so I think definitely they'll see a different team, a more grown-up team the next time.
I will say, though, that we mostly agreed. We pretty much thought after the game, as I was just kind of standing there looking at the box score, SMU was good. They didn't make many mistakes in that match, but they jumped out quickly on UCF. But then it sort of felt like the team sort of found their footing, UCF did. And even though they lost the match, I didn't come away, and certainly I don't think the team came away thinking that SMU was all that much better than them in terms of, whenever we get the chance to get them again. Well, that leads to this coming weekend and 2 huge matches for UCF volleyball. First, Thursday at the venue at 7 p.m. against Cincinnati. And a look at the standings will show you that Cincinnati is 1 game up in the loss column on UCF in the women's volleyball standings at 8-2 in the league. SMU at 9-1. UCF tied with Temple at 7-3 in the conference. Why is this important? Because remember, like we said before, there's no conference tournament in volleyball. So the regular season winner gets the automatic bid to the NCAA. In addition, UCF gets East Carolina on Saturday, 1 p.m. Usually we play matches Friday and Sunday. This week we moved it up a day to Thursday and Saturday. Cincinnati match is huge. East Carolina match is also huge, even though East Carolina is not overly great. They're kind of middling in the American at 4-6. The key right now for UCF, you got to keep an eye on the RPI. The Knights right now are 60th in the RPI. They dropped only 2 spots after the loss to SMU at home. Here's who's ahead of them in the RPI from the American. The Knights are at 60. Temple's at 55. Cincinnati's at 47. We got them on Thursday night. SMU's at 44. We just lost to them. All right? That rounds out the American Athletic Conference in terms of the volleyball and the RPI. And you can almost draw a perfect line right at around 64, 65, year in and year out, of who gets into the tournament and who doesn't. UCF right now, like I said, standing at 60 in the RPI. If they can get this win on Thursday night against Cincinnati, that's going to be a huge boost to the RPI and a huge boost to the Knights also in the conference standings, because then they will have leapfrogged Cincinnati in the standings because they will have that game in hand in the loss column. So, like I said, Thursday night, huge match for UCF volleyball. It's also Dig Pink night, so if you're going to come out to the match, make sure you wear something pink. In support of breast cancer awareness. They do this every year at UCF. So I know I'll be wearing my pink to that match when I do PA. But the last, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 matches as they head, this season ends around Thanksgiving weekend. Down the stretch we come, because you play double round robin in this conference schedule, and you can't leave this match against Cincinnati at home on the board. I think you got to defend the home court against the Bearcats this Thursday night. So, what say you, Eric? I mean, I'm thinking that this is also you want to come off of that loss against SMU by getting a big win too, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, I thought if you could split the SMU Cincinnati, you'd be in pretty good shape. But it's gonna be a battle, because I told you I watched Cincinnati. I called the match last year. Cincinnati played UCF. I called the match on the American Digital Network with Aaron Campbell, former UCF volleyball player, and I know me and Aaron were very impressed with Cincinnati. They are in a dynamic team, explosive offensively. They're number one in the conference in hitting percentage. I think they have the best player in the conference in Jordan Thompson, but she's a dynamic player. She's among the leaders, if not at the top in kills. She's a top 10 in hitting percentage. And she gave UCF all they can handle even earlier this year when Cincinnati won in 3 sets. So, it's part of that sophomore class that she has that is phenomenal. That was just tremendous. By the way, her uncle is Chris Dolman. Let me just clarify. Her uncle is Chris Dolman. Yeah. I don't believe she actually is.
Chris's brother is her dad, Tyrone.
Yes.
And yeah.
But she's her uncle is Chris Dolman, the former defensive lineman for the Minnesota Vikings. But she's number one in kills in the conference. She's averaging almost 5 kills a game, Jeff, 4.95. Of course, it's a matchup of 2 of the best in kills. Jayla is right there in third in 4.41. So if you're a casual volleyball fan, this is a match you want to see. Cincinnati's exciting to watch. Obviously Thompson gets a lot of the attention, but they've got other talented players as well. Carly Nolan is in kills as well. She's a sophomore. She's part of that recruiting class. Tingerhoff leads the conference in assists. It is a very dynamic offensive team. Interestingly, Cincinnati's number one in the conference in hitting percentage, and then UCF is third, Jeff. So this should be an exciting match, if nothing else. The key is UCF has to, and see if you agree with me, Cincinnati is a team that likes to get on big runs, 8, 9, 10 points. And next thing you know, you're down 4, 5, 6 points and the set gets away from you. I think that's what happened to UCF earlier this year at Cincinnati. It's what happened to them last year when they played Cincinnati. They got to withstand those big momentum rushes with Cincinnati because they're so dynamic, because they could score with Nolan or Thompson. Very big test for UCF defensively.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, Cincinnati this season has only had, let's see, starting if you take out the first 2 weekends, they've only had 1 match that's gone 4. It's been feast or famine, either a sweep or a 5-setter. So a very streaky team in Cincinnati. They're coming off actually losing to Temple this past Sunday at Fifth Third Arena at home. And got swept by Temple nonetheless, and that was after beating UConn in 5. So, and that Temple loss actually snapped a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 match winning streak for Temple. So, and
yeah, I don't like that either. I was kind of hoping they would continue on that win streak, right? Because they're going to be, they're going to be refocused after losing to a very good Temple team, which tells you Jeff, and you've seen all these teams, and the quality, I think, of the American Conference this season is the best it's ever been. I really do believe, and I hope that this league gets multiple bids.
I think the league deserves multiple bids, certainly.
Yes, I hope. Whether they do or don't, I don't know. I can't control what the committee does, but I think they've earned that. This has been a good league in a good year.
Yeah, we'll see how that shakes out with UCF at number 60 in the RPI. And again, like I said, beat Cincinnati, who right now is at 47. That's going to boost up the RPI, I think, considerably here for UCF. All right. Let's talk a little men's soccer. Check in on the Knights, who were down in FIU tonight, and but unfortunately came up short. 2-0 loss for the Knights. They have 3 matches left to go in the season. At Temple on October 29th, that's Saturday. Wednesday, November 2nd that match was canceled. The FAU match was canceled on November 2nd. So then after that, it's Senior Day, November 5th, 1 week from this coming Saturday, against Cincinnati to close out the year. All right, Eric, I know you talked about you answered the question earlier about what are you looking forward to the most, and we're going to be scoreboard watching on Thursday, aren't we?
Yeah, you got Cincinnati, UCF volleyball. What is it, 7 o'clock first serve?
Yeah, volleyball first serve 8 o'clock again. Or no, I'm sorry, I'm looking at women's soccer. 7 o'clock on Thursday night for UCF women's volleyball at the venue.
Make sure, I was going to say, make sure you know the time. You got to be there.
Yeah, I know.
So 7 o'clock. And by the way, for those of you, if you want to get there a little earlier than that, softball's actually playing her fall ball game early before that. So you got fall ball going on. I think it's like 4:30 they start on Thursday, and they play Friday as well, morning and afternoon. But then you got the volleyball at 7 at home against Cincinnati, and then UCF at Tulsa again on the American Digital Network, 8 o'clock Eastern. So, the math, like people like me, forget the Jaguars-Titans nonsense, NFL nonsense on Thursday night. All right, seriously, don't even waste your time with that. Go to your laptop, go get Knights TV, watch the volleyball, or, hey, if you want to hook me up, that's even better. But just get yourself hooked up to the Knights TV. I'm sure they can give you all the details on UCFKnights.com, and then go picture-in-picture. You get the volleyball there, and then you got the soccer on the American Digital Network, and I think it's huge matches for both teams. I think for UCF, it's huge on the volleyball side because they're, the second half of this conference starts, and you're right. I think it's a big match. I'm not going to say must win. It's too early for that, but it is a big match because the way the schedule breaks out for UCF, they got to go back to SMU later in the year and things like that. So you want to stay within reach of that first place and try to win the regular season title. And then for women's soccer, is already dissected. Lots of implications trying to get into the conference tournament. So a very intriguing Thursday night, which, starts off a very busy weekend of UCF sports because then you turn around. You mentioned the soccer going on Sunday, the last day of the regular season for the American Conference. UCF tries to get themselves in there, a big match against Memphis. Volleyball, you mentioned with the match on Saturday, and then, of course, football with Houston.
Yeah, so it's a big weekend again for UCF sports. And the best part is Thursday night World Series is not on Thursday night either, so you're not missing the chance to see the Cubs on Thursday night either. So had to get that in, even though I'm a Yankee fan. All right, Eric. Well, that's going to do it for the Black and Gold Banneret Podcast for this week. Eric, where can people catch you?
Eric Lopez Elo on Twitter. Just follow me there, and you'll get all the latest of what I'm up to.
And hit me up at Jeff_Sharon. You can follow the Banneret at UCF_Banneret. Also look us up on Facebook at Black and Gold Banneret and at blackandgoldbanneret.com, where you can sign up for our email newsletter. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast if you don't already on iTunes. Stitcher I'm still working out, but it's also on Google Play. And oh, by the way, newly hosted on SoundCloud. SoundCloud is where we are hosting this podcast. So if you are a UCF fan and you're on SoundCloud, subscribe to our podcast right there and give us a listen and give us some feedback too. We'd love to hear from you. So for Eric Lopez, I am Jeff Sharon. Thank you so much for listening. This has been the Black and Gold Banneret Podcast. Go Knights, and we will see you next week.
Today's episode is brought to you by Cars.com. With over 2 million vehicles and 50,000 more added every day, Cars.com will match you with the perfect car for you, your budget, your life, your style. And if you're ready to say goodbye to your current car, Cars.com will get you an instant offer to cash it in. Just start by entering your license plate and get matched with a local dealer who will write you the check. So whether you're looking to buy or sell, just go to Cars.com. It's magical.